I never imagined life would feel this quiet. After years of cramped apartments, noisy neighbors, and the endless hum of city life, I finally bought my dream ranch. It wasn't just any property. It was a sprawling piece of land left behind by a bankrupted owner, a place where the grass seemed greener, the sky stretched wider, and time itself slowed down. As I drove down the long, dusty driveway for the first time, I could feel the weight of years of struggle lifting off my shoulders. I had finally made it. The house looked tired but full of character. Its weathered wood and creaky porch spoke of 100 untold stories. I ran my hand along the railing, imagining the mornings I would spend here with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in gold and pink. For a brief moment, I let myself dream. The barn in the back, though falling apart in some places, felt like it was waiting for me. Horses could graze there, cows could wander, and me, I could finally breathe. I spent the day exploring the ranch, letting my imagination take the reins. I wandered through the fields, imagining wildflowers in full bloom, the sound of horses' hooves echoing in the distance. I even talked to the cows. Don't judge me, they didn't respond, but there was something comforting about their quiet presence. I wandered down to the pond, watching the sunlight sparkle on the water's surface. Everything seemed perfect, almost surreal. I couldn't believe this beauty was mine. But as the sun began to set, something strange caught my eye. In the distance, 4 headlights appeared, cutting through the golden haze. At first, I thought it might be some lost tourists or perhaps the neighbor coming to welcome me. But as they got closer, a cold knot of unease formed in my stomach. 4 trucks, big, dark, silent trucks. Their engines hummed low, like a predator waiting in the shadows. They stopped just beyond the gate, perfectly aligned, as if they had been waiting for me. I froze on the porch, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't make sense of it. I knew this ranch had been abandoned for years, and the previous owner had left because of financial ruin. There shouldn't be anyone here. Yet there they were, 4 trucks, dark as night, unmoving, silent, and watching. I could feel their presence across the field, heavy and oppressive, like a storm rolling in. I grabbed my binoculars and squinted, trying to see who was inside. Shadows moved behind the tinted windows, but nothing was clear. I could feel my hands trembling slightly. For a moment, I questioned myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they were just lost drivers, but a deep instinct whispered that this was something else, something deliberate, something meant for me. The wind picked up, rustling the old oak trees at the edge of the property. My dogs, usually calm, started growling, ears perked and teeth bared. That's when the reality hit me. This was not a coincidence. Someone knew I had bought this ranch. Someone wanted to intimidate me, or worse. The air felt electric, thick with anticipation, and suddenly the quiet ranch didn't feel peaceful at all. I retreated inside, my mind racing. What could they want? Were they from some old ranch association trying to assert control? Or was this something more dangerous? My thoughts twisted and turned, each one darker than the last. I tried to calm myself, telling my heart to slow down, but every instinct screamed that the night was going to be long and nothing would be as simple as it seemed. I sat on the porch, gripping my coffee cup like a lifeline, staring at the trucks. I felt small, exposed, and yet determined. This ranch was mine. I had worked for it, dreamed for it, and sacrificed for it. And no shadowy truck from nowhere was going to take that away from me. But as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the headlights stayed fixed on the gate, unmoving, and I realized I was no longer just a proud ranch owner. I was a stranger in a place I thought I knew, staring down the first real threat to my peace, and I had no idea what was about to unfold. The night was falling fast, and the ranch, which had felt like a sanctuary just hours ago, now seemed like a trap. Those 4 trucks hadn't moved, not an inch. I kept thinking maybe they were just waiting for someone else, but deep down I knew it was me. Every instinct in my body screamed that this wasn't a coincidence. I could feel it in my bones. I tried to convince myself to stay calm. I poured another cup of coffee, told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were just looking for directions. But even as I tried to reason, a chill ran down my spine. There was something about the precision of their positioning, the way their engines hummed softly like predators ready to strike, that didn't feel natural. I stepped closer to the edge of the porch, peering through the binoculars. The windows were too dark to see faces clearly, but I could see faint movement, a shadow shifting from side to side. Then, for a brief moment, a figure stepped out of one of the trucks and disappeared again. My stomach twisted. My mind raced with every possible scenario. Was this some kind of weird local group enforcing old rules? Were they criminals? Or worse, had they been sent here for a reason I couldn't yet imagine? The dogs growled louder. Normally, they'd wag their tails at strangers, but now they crouched low, hackles raised, teeth bared. I felt a pang of guilt for bringing them here, but I also realized they were warning me. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and hesitated. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to show that this ranch wasn't going to be taken over without a fight. Another part of me knew that stepping outside without a plan could be dangerous. I took a deep breath and decided to move slowly toward the gate, keeping my eyes fixed on the trucks. As I approached, a sudden noise made me freeze. A door creaked, and I swear I saw one of the figures glance directly at me. It felt like the night had shifted. The warm, golden sunset was gone, replaced by a shadow that seemed to seep into everything around me. My pulse raced, and I realized I wasn't just worried about property anymore. I was worried about what these people might do next. I raised my voice, trying to sound confident. "Hello, can I help you?" My words sounded small, even to me. There was no response. Only the faint hum of engines, the subtle scrape of tires on gravel, and the heavy weight of silence pressing down. My stomach sank. I hadn't expected this level of intimidation. They weren't just here to make a visit, they were testing me. I stepped back, my heart hammering. I needed to figure out my next move, and fast. My mind raced through possibilities. Should I call the police? But then again, who knew if they'd arrive in time, or even understand what was happening? I glanced at my phone, the screen glowing weakly in the dark. The signal was shaky, like the universe itself was conspiring to isolate me here. I decided to retreat inside and plan. I needed proof of ownership, a clear stance, and some way to show them that I wasn't a weak target. I ran back to the house, my boots crunching against the gravel, and slammed the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I reached for the papers, the deeds, anything that could confirm this was mine. But as I rifled through the stack of old documents, a sudden thought hit me. These trucks weren't ordinary. Whoever was behind them had a purpose, and it wasn't just to intimidate. They were organized, deliberate, and patient. They had waited for nightfall, they had positioned themselves strategically, and they hadn't made a single unnecessary move. Every instinct in me screamed that this night could get much worse. I sat on the floor, clutching the deeds, staring out the window at the trucks that hadn't moved an inch. My mind jumped between scenarios. Maybe they were waiting for me to leave, maybe they were waiting for something I didn't know about. Every passing minute made the night stretch longer, and the sense of unease grew heavier. And then, without warning, one of the truck's headlights flicked. Not a simple flash, but a controlled, deliberate signal, like someone was communicating with someone else. My heart stopped. I realized they weren't acting alone. They were part of a plan, and somehow I was the center of it. I sank to the floor, feeling a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. My dream ranch had been my escape, my peace, and now it had become the stage for a confrontation I didn't understand. But deep down, even in the fear, a spark ignited. This was my home. I wasn't going to back down, not tonight. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. By morning, nothing would be the same. The next morning, the ranch felt different. The golden light of sunrise usually brought comfort, but today it only highlighted the tension that had settled like a fog over my property. I couldn't stop thinking about the trucks. 4 of them. Silent, unmoving, and watching me. And though the sun had risen, the fear from last night lingered like a shadow. I tried to act normal, telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe they had just left during the night. But as I stepped outside, I saw them again, parked in exactly the same positions. My stomach twisted and my hands went clammy. How had they returned so early? Were they lying in wait, or had they never left at all? I felt a rush of determination. If I wanted to protect my ranch, I had to face them. I took a deep breath, clenched my fists, and walked toward the gate, forcing each step to be steady despite my racing heart. As I approached, one of the truck's doors opened. My pulse jumped. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, with a dark cap shading his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He simply stood there, silent, like a statue carved from steel. "Do you own this property?" His voice was flat, devoid of warmth, but heavy with authority. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I bought this ranch, it's mine." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked me over, scanning from head to toe as if assessing my worthiness to be here. My mind raced. Who were these people, and why did they care so much about who owned the land? Then another man emerged from the shadows of the trucks. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "We need to see proof of ownership," he said, not politely, not like a neighbor asking for clarification. It sounded like a challenge, like a dare. I fumbled with my papers, shoving the deeds into my hands and waving them for emphasis. "Here, this is the official deed. It's all in my name. You can check the county records if you want, but this ranch belongs to me." They glanced at the papers, but instead of handing them back or leaving, they exchanged a brief look that made my stomach drop. There was something unspoken between them, some signal I couldn't understand. Then the tall man leaned slightly forward. "You need to understand," he said slowly. "This ranch falls under regulations from a previous association. You may think you own it, but there are rules, old rules, rules that still have power." I laughed nervously, more out of disbelief than humor. "Old rules? I bought a bankrupt property. There is no association. It doesn't exist anymore." The man didn't flinch. "It exists where it matters," he said. That was all. Then he stepped back, letting the others move slightly forward, almost like a chess game, testing my reactions. For a moment, I felt paralyzed. Every fiber of my body screamed to run, to call for help, to somehow escape this surreal nightmare. But this was my ranch. I had worked too hard, dreamed too long, to let some mysterious men intimidate me on my first full day as the owner. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and met his gaze. "You're not taking anything from me," I said firmly, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I worked for this. I bought it fair and square. I don't care about your rules. This land is mine." The air between us felt charged, heavy with tension. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands were shaking slightly, but I didn't let them see it. And then, just as I thought the confrontation couldn't get any worse, one of the men glanced nervously at another, and I noticed a flicker of uncertainty. It was subtle, but it was there. They weren't completely united. There was hesitation, a crack in the armor. I realized then that maybe I wasn't as powerless as I'd thought. Maybe this standoff wasn't just about them intimidating me. It was about testing me, seeing if I would back down. And I wasn't going to. For now, the men stepped back, returning to the shadow of their trucks. They didn't leave, though. They stayed, watching, waiting. And I knew that this first confrontation was only the beginning. I didn't understand what they wanted or how far they were willing to go. But one thing was certain. This ranch, my dream, my home, was now the battlefield. I turned back toward the house, my heart still racing, my mind spinning. I had survived the first face-off, but the tension clung to me like a second skin. Every step I took back to the porch reminded me that nothing about this property would ever be simple again. That night, the trucks remained at the gate, silent and unmoving, their presence a constant reminder that the peace I had imagined when I bought the ranch was gone. And as I sat there, staring at the trucks, I realized that the fight for my home had only just begun. After the morning confrontation, I thought maybe I had at least bought myself some time. The men at the gate hadn't left, but they'd backed off slightly, almost as if they were reassessing me. I returned to the house, hoping to finally breathe, to sit down and plan my next move. But the moment I stepped inside, I realized that the real challenge was just beginning. I needed to find every piece of paper that proved this ranch was mine. Deeds, bills, old correspondence, anything that would confirm I had legal ownership. The previous owner had left a mountain of documents behind, stacked in boxes, folders, and envelopes that smelled like dust and old leather. I started sorting, trying to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to the trucks waiting silently outside. Every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, every gust of wind like a warning. Hours passed as I sifted through the paperwork. I found deeds signed decades ago, mortgage agreements, property tax receipts. Each one made my heart race a little faster. I had proof. This ranch belonged to me, but as I stared at the official deed, relief was cut short. The men outside were still there, still watching. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. One of them was on the phone, making a call, and the way he spoke was precise, deliberate. Whatever plan they had, it wasn't improvised. I tried to calm myself. Maybe calling someone for help was the next step. I reached for my phone, but the signal was weak, barely enough to make a call. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Were they going to storm the property? Were they waiting for someone else to arrive? Each passing minute stretched longer than the last, making the ranch feel smaller, suffocating like the walls themselves were closing in. I paced the living room, clutching the deed, trying to think. Then it hit me, I wasn't prepared. I had the papers, yes, but I had no plan. I had no backup, no reinforcements. And if these men were as organized as they appeared, they wouldn't leave just because I waved a piece of paper in their faces. I had to figure out how to protect myself, and fast. Every creak outside, every rustle in the bushes made my pulse spike. I could see shadows moving near the trucks, silhouettes shifting. It wasn't just a standoff anymore. They were actively watching my every move. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation, like the night was holding its breath. My dogs, normally calm, stayed glued to the windows, growling low and tense, sensing the unease that I could barely put into words. Then I noticed something subtle but chilling. One of the men, the tallest one, glanced repeatedly at the others, whispering under his breath. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. He was communicating, signaling. It wasn't just intimidation, they had coordination, planning. And I realized the terrifying truth. I wasn't facing just a single threat. I was facing a team, and I had no idea how deep this went. I sank into a chair, staring at the papers in my hands, trying to feel the confidence I had yesterday. But instead, I felt a creeping dread. This ranch, which I had thought would be my sanctuary, had become a trap. Every sound of the wind through the trees felt like footsteps. Every flicker of light on the trucks made my stomach churn. They were still there, silent and patient, and I had to wonder, how long would they wait? How far were they willing to go? And then the first real sign that this might escalate came. One of the truck's headlights flicked, again, not randomly, but in a deliberate pattern. I froze. My pulse thundered in my ears. That was no ordinary signal. Someone else was on their way, or maybe they were coordinating with someone watching from further away. I didn't know, but I knew one thing. The situation was about to change, and I had to be ready. For the rest of the day, I stayed on edge. I moved quietly from window to window, clutching the deed, trying to anticipate every move they might make. Every passing hour stretched longer than the last, and deep down, I knew that this was no longer just a matter of paperwork or proving ownership. This had become a test of courage, of resolve, of who would claim the ranch in the end. As night fell again, the truck stayed, unwavering. I realized that the peaceful ranch I had dreamed of didn't exist anymore. And I also realized that, somehow, I had to turn the tables. I had to find a way to face these men and finally reclaim not just my property, but my sense of safety. But I had no idea how, or if I would survive the night. I hadn't slept. Every sound in the house felt magnified, the creak of the floorboards, the whistle of the wind through the broken barn door, even the faint rustle of leaves outside. My mind refused to shut down, replaying every detail of the day, the trucks, the men, their deliberate movements, and that chilling flicker of the headlights. I knew they hadn't left. I knew they were waiting. Then around 2 in the morning, I heard it, a low rumble, almost like a growl echoing across the property. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. At first, I thought it was the wind or perhaps my imagination playing tricks. But then came the second sound, the sharp crunch of tires against gravel. My stomach dropped. I threw off the thin blanket I had wrapped around myself, grabbed the flashlight I kept by the bed, and crept to the window. Through the pale glow of the moon, I saw them. The 4 trucks had moved. They were circling the property now, engines humming, lights cutting through the darkness in brief, threatening flashes. My dogs had bolted to the window, barking furiously, hackles raised, as if they could sense the danger before I fully understood it. I swallowed hard and tried to think. I couldn't just sit there. If they were planning something, I needed to be ready. I grabbed the deed and my phone, even though I knew the signal was weak. I tried calling the local sheriff, but the line went dead. No bars, no service. I was completely alone, completely exposed, and the men knew it. I slipped quietly out the back door, flashlight in hand. Every step I took across the uneven ground felt like a statement. I wasn't afraid. But the truth was, my knees shook, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from panicking. The trucks had spread out now, positioning themselves near the barn and the gates, as if trying to cut off every possible escape route. One of them stepped out, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Tall, imposing, motionless. I froze. He didn't move toward me, didn't speak, just stood there like a living shadow, watching, assessing. My mind raced with questions. Were they waiting for me to make a mistake? Were they armed? How far were they willing to go to scare me off? The barn door creaked and my heart jumped. One of the truck's doors opened and I could just make out a shadow moving inside. It felt like time had slowed. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, knuckles white. I told myself I had to stay calm, had to think clearly, but panic bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to erupt with every rustle, every engine hum. Then, without warning, headlights flashed across the barn in rapid succession, briefly illuminating the yard. My vision blurred with adrenaline. The dogs barked and growled in a chaotic symphony, and I realized that this wasn't just intimidation anymore. They were testing me, probing my limits, trying to see how I would react in the dark. I crouched behind a hay bale, heart racing, flashlight trembling in my hand. I knew I needed a plan. Maybe I could use the barn doors to my advantage, or the sprinklers outside, anything to create confusion. I had never imagined that defending a ranch would feel like preparing for a battle, but this was it. My home, my dream, and I couldn't let it be taken from me without a fight. Every second stretched longer than the last. The trucks moved slowly, methodically, circling like predators. Shadows stretched across the field, merging with the darkness of the night. And then, for a moment, everything went still. Silence except for the low rumble of the engines. It was almost worse than the noise, the calm before the storm. I realized something terrifying. They weren't going to leave. They weren't going to call it off. This night would either end with me standing my ground or losing the one place I had ever truly called mine. And as I gripped the flashlight tighter, feeling the cold metal in my hands, a spark of resolve ignited. I had survived the day. I had survived the confrontation. And now, under the pale moonlight, I was going to survive the night. I just didn't know how. By sunrise, exhaustion had set in, but the tension didn't fade. The trucks were still there, looming like silent sentinels at the edge of my property, and the men inside seemed almost impatient. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, barely breathed, and yet my resolve had grown sharper. This was my home, my hard-earned sanctuary, and I refused to let shadows and intimidation take it from me. I stepped outside again, flashlight in hand, not for light this time, but as a symbol of my determination. The tall man from before was waiting. He didn't speak, didn't move much, just watched, his eyes assessing, calculating. And for the first time, I noticed a flicker of tension in his posture, a brief hesitation that wasn't there before. Perhaps they weren't as confident as they wanted me to believe. "Who are you working for?" I asked, my voice firm but tinged with exhaustion. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" He tilted his head slightly, considering before speaking. "We enforce rules from an old association, rules that still matter. You may think the property is yours, but it is bound by obligations you are unaware of." I laughed, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Obligations? This ranch was bankrupt. You're telling me some old paperwork from decades ago can dictate my life?" He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he gestured to the trucks behind him. I noticed then that the other men were watching me silently, each of them poised and alert. There was coordination here, a unity of purpose. But I also noticed something else, tiny cracks in their composure. One man glanced nervously at the other, whispering under his breath, and I realized they weren't invincible. I straightened my shoulders, drawing strength from the realization. I had the right to be here. I had fought tooth and nail to claim this place. And though I was tired, scared, and completely outnumbered, I wouldn't let fear dictate my actions. "I bought this ranch fair and square," I said firmly. "I worked for it, I dreamed of it, and no set of old rules is going to take it away from me." For a moment there was silence. The air felt thick, like the calm just before a storm. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the distant calls of birds, the low hum of the truck's engines. And then the tall man took a step closer, his shadow stretching across the gravel like a dark veil. "You're brave," he said quietly. "Perhaps too brave, but bravery without strategy can be dangerous." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. I didn't have a strategy, not yet. But I had something else, resolve and the knowledge that this was my home. I refused to let intimidation win. Suddenly, a sound from one of the trucks caught my attention, a slight shuffle, a door creaking. One of the men had moved slightly out of sync with the others. My pulse raced. I realized then that if I could read their movements, even subtly, I might gain an advantage. Perhaps they weren't as unified as they seemed. Perhaps there was a way to turn this standoff in my favor. I took a deep breath, letting the morning air fill my lungs. "Listen," I said, my voice steady now. "I don't know who sent you or why, but this isn't the way to settle anything. You came here to intimidate me, and it hasn't worked. If you want to leave peacefully, I can let you go, but if you continue, I won't back down." The tall man paused, then nodded ever so slightly. It wasn't a victory, far from it, but it was acknowledgement. He stepped back, motioning for the others to do the same. The tension eased slightly, though the trucks remained, engines idling like dark sentinels. I realized then that this face-off wasn't over, far from it. But I had made one thing clear: I wasn't afraid and I wasn't going anywhere. And in that moment I understood something important. Courage wasn't about winning every battle. Sometimes it was about standing your ground, even when you were surrounded, exhausted, and unsure of what came next. As I retreated to the porch, my body trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion, I knew I had survived the first true test. But deep down, I also knew the real challenge was yet to come. Whoever these men worked for, or whatever mysterious rules they claimed, wouldn't give up easily, and I would have to be ready. The trucks remained at the edge of the property, silent and imposing, as if daring me to make the next move. And I knew, without a doubt, that the battle for my ranch was only beginning. After the tense face-off at dawn, I knew one thing clearly: the trucks weren't going anywhere, and neither were the men. They had come prepared, coordinated, and relentless, and if I didn't act, I'd be trapped on my own property. But for the first time, I also knew that they were human, fallible, predictable, and if I played my cards right, vulnerable. I spent the morning packing the yard, surveying the property. The barn, the gate, the fields, they were all part of the battlefield now. Every hay bale, every puddle, every shadow could become an advantage if I thought creatively. I had to use my environment to level the playing field. Adrenaline surged through me as an idea began to take shape. I would fight back, not with guns, not with confrontation, but with strategy. First, the sprinklers. I remembered the old irrigation system near the pond, still functional but neglected. I ran to the control box and turned them on. Water sprayed across the field, catching the sunlight and creating a curtain of mist. It was beautiful, almost serene, but terrifying in its potential. If the trucks tried to move through it, their tires would slip, their visibility would be reduced. I smiled grimly. Nature was my ally. Next, the barn. I repositioned old hay bales near the doors and windows, creating natural barriers. If anyone tried to enter, they'd have to navigate through a maze of obstacles. My heart pounded as I worked, muscles burning, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't since buying this ranch. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just reacting, I was taking control. Then came the lights. I strung up every lantern I could find, placing them at angles that would reflect off mirrors and windows. It wasn't much, but I knew that in the dim morning light, sudden flashes could disorient anyone trying to advance. The trucks, black and ominous at the gate, would be vulnerable to anything unexpected. Every detail mattered now. By late afternoon, I stood back and surveyed my preparations. I was exhausted, covered in mud and sweat, but I had created a landscape that worked in my favor. The trucks remained at the edge of the property, unmoving, but I knew they were watching. And soon one of them made the first move. A sudden flash of water hit the tires, spraying the men inside, and I couldn't help but laugh, even though it was tense, almost maniacal. The truck skidded slightly, giving me the first taste of control I had all day. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't prepared for a rancher who was resourceful, stubborn, and desperate to protect his home. As the other trucks tried to reposition, the lights and mirrors disoriented them further. Shadows danced across the field, the mist created by the sprinklers adding an eerie, almost surreal effect. I felt like a general commanding my battlefield, my heart hammering, mind racing. Every move I made forced them to react, and I could see hesitation creeping into their carefully coordinated strategy. At one point I misstepped, slipped in the mud, and tumbled headfirst into a puddle. Water soaked my shirt, mud covered my boots, and for a moment I froze, embarrassed and frustrated. But even as I scrambled to my feet, I realized that humor, even in moments of chaos, was my weapon too. I laughed, the sound echoing across the field, and I swear the men paused for just a second, caught off guard by the absurdity. Hours passed. One truck backed away slowly, then another. The tall man, once so imposing, now looked uncertain, his posture rigid but hesitant. The coordinated attack had been disrupted. My countermeasures, improvisation, and refusal to cower had worked. For the first time since they arrived, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as the sun dipped toward the horizon, I knew the war wasn't over. 2 trucks still lingered at the gate, engines idling like dark sentinels. I had gained the upper hand, yes, but these men were patient. They would regroup. They would return, and when they did, I had to be ready. Standing in the middle of my ranch, drenched and exhausted, I realized something powerful. I had faced fear, uncertainty, and intimidation, and I had survived. I had protected my home, not with violence, but with wit, courage, and creativity. And though the threat remained, I felt stronger, more prepared for whatever came next. I looked across the field at the remaining trucks and allowed myself a deep, steadying breath. The battle had shifted, the tables had turned, and for the first time I felt like I wasn't just defending a property. I was defending a dream, a piece of my soul. And I knew, without a doubt, that tomorrow would bring the final showdown. The night before I had barely slept, my mind replaying every moment, every move, every breathless second from the past days. The trucks had dwindled from 4 to 2, and while that felt like a small victory, I knew better than to celebrate too early. These men were organized, patient, and relentless. They would return, and they would try again. I walked the fields at dawn, coffee in hand, surveying my domain. Every inch of this ranch was mine, the barn, the pond, the gates, the rolling fields, and yet the events of the past week had made it feel like a war zone. My dogs trotted at my side, their ears perked and eyes alert. They had sensed every threat, every unease, and now, like me, they were ready for whatever came next. The trucks appeared just as I expected, 2 dark silhouettes against the rising sun. Engines humming softly, tires crunching against gravel. The men inside looked calm, but I could see it, hesitation. They had miscalculated before. They hadn't anticipated my strategies, my improvisation, my refusal to be intimidated. And now they were aware of it. I stepped onto the porch, my stance firm, my heart steady despite the lingering adrenaline. I had learned something crucial. Courage isn't about charging blindly. It's about standing your ground, knowing your strengths, and exploiting the weaknesses of those who think they can overpower you. The tall man emerged first, stepping carefully from his truck, his eyes scanning the field, then landing on me. For a long moment we just stared at each other. No words, just tension stretching across the ranch like an invisible rope. Then, slowly, I started walking toward him. Not recklessly, but deliberately, holding my ground. "You've wasted your time," I said calmly, though my voice carried through the crisp morning air. "This ranch is mine. You came here to intimidate me, but you misjudged who I am. I'm not going anywhere." The man didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a subtle nod, almost as if acknowledging defeat without admitting it. Behind him, the other man shifted uncomfortably, their coordination now fractured. I realized then that this wasn't just a battle over land. It was a test of willpower, of resilience, and I had passed. One by one, the men returned to their trucks. The engines roared to life, breaking the tension, and I watched as they slowly drove away, disappearing down the long driveway. Silence reclaimed the ranch, but it was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was a silence of victory, a quiet that carried the weight of survival and triumph. I sank onto the porch, feeling the tension drain from my body in a rush of exhaustion and relief. My hands shook, my knees were weak, but my heart felt lighter than it had in days. I had protected my home, my dream, my sanctuary, and no one, not these men, not some outdated rules, not fear itself, could take that from me. As I looked across the fields, the barn bathed in morning light, the pond reflecting the rising sun, I realized something else. The ranch had changed me. It had tested me, pushed me to the edge, forced me to confront fear I never knew existed. And yet, it had also reminded me of my own strength, my resourcefulness, and my courage. I walked to the barn, running my hand along the weathered wood, smiling despite the mud and exhaustion. This was my home. My fight, my determination had turned the tide. And though I knew there would be challenges ahead, maintenance, whether unexpected visitors, the most important battle had been won. I had proven that my peace, my sanctuary, was mine to protect. The dogs barked happily, circling me, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. I laughed, the sound echoing across the fields, and for the first time in days I felt a deep, unshakable calm. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, watching the sun climb higher. Every blade of grass, every tree, every ripple on the pond now felt like a testament to resilience, to victory, and to the simple, unshakable truth that courage can change everything. And as I sipped my coffee, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers, I realized this ranch wasn't just land or buildings. It was a living proof that persistence, courage, and cleverness could turn fear into triumph. The trucks were gone, the men were gone, and the ranch was mine, completely, undeniably mine. I leaned back, eyes closed, heart steady, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe. The battle was over. The peace I had imagined when I first bought this ranch had finally returned. And this time I knew it was mine to keep. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.